Ja, just det. Klicka sig fram. Kan ni höra mig ordentligt, eller? Ja, den är på. Hör ni mig nu? Ja. Ja, nu hörde mig jätteväl, hörde jag. We will do this presentation in English because my colleague Jonathan doesn't speak Swedish, so
And
lite. So since we've worked on this presentation together, it makes sense to speak the same language. Den här klickar mig fram, eller? So this is the book. First of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting us here today to talk about this book. It's a book I wrote together with Katarina Despotovic, who is a sociologist and researcher at Gothenburg University. She couldn't be here today, but I know she would have wanted to. The book came out a few years ago now, 2015, and as you said, it's been referred to many times. It's been used in the debate about city development in Gothenburg, for sure. But very often I find that it's been used. I'm very happy. We are both very happy about the fact that it got such a that it was received so well, and that it really found its place in the debate. But sometimes we also felt that it was a way of ticking a box in saying we have addressed the issue of gentrification. We read this book. We're not going to let that happen again. The story of Kvillebäcken will not repeat itself, and so on. But unfortunately, that's not really the case. So the book is about, for those of you who, and I assume that's most of you who haven't read it, it's about a small recycled industrial zone on Hisingen that was transformed into an exclusive and expensive residential area in less than 10 years. It was a project that was led by the municipality through Älvstrandsbolaget, who formed a consortium together with 7 of the biggest builders in Gothenburg. I'm going to show you just some images of, this is from the book, and this is just a few images of people who had venues in Kvillebäcken. It was actually a place that was filled with activities and people, cafes, flea markets, small shops, mosques, immigrant societies, and so on. It wasn't really a place that was known for art or artists, but it was certainly a place that was attractive for people from all over Gothenburg who had the need of renting a small venue to explore the possibility of having a small shop or a small business. This is from the Finnish Tango Society. They have karaoke and a Finnish tango. They are still there, actually, but they are will soon close. It's problematic for them to be there now because they are now disturbing the new residents with their music because they have a dance every Saturday, and they would always open the windows. These are pensioners who dance tango and sing karaoke. So they open the windows, and it's now disturbing the new neighbors. So this is from the Gambian mosque. There were actually 5 mosques in Kvillebäcken at that time. This is from a MMA club who's still there on Ångpannegatan. So this is actually the border between the old and the new. You can see the new buildings here, and this is what it looked like. This is Färgfabriksgatan. So this is a story about specific people and their specific destinies and what happened to them. And when we wrote the book, we wanted to make sure that these stories were not to be forgotten, that no one would ever forget what happened in Kvillebäcken and to those people. But it's also a story about who is included and who is excluded in our city, who gets access to space. I will get back to a little later.
I will.
Yeah, and leave the word. And leave the word to Jon, a moment.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to introduce some key connecting points from my perspective from a domain of transdisciplinary oriented architecture and urbanism research. My main motivation with my research is a critique of approaches which try to control and speak from a single voice, such as we'll show happened later with Kvillebäcken. So it's working towards what I call a multivocal critical and design approach, which addresses how art and design practitioners can develop greater capacity to critically wayfind within the complexities of engaging with public cultural institutions around participatory processes. We won't go into all of that, but like the concept of multivocality, which it comes from literary theory, my main approach is paradoxical in that it tries to have two approaches in one. The first being that it sees this field of engagement and analysis as complex, or as a complex spatiality of voices which are interacting, interdependent, but also acting in parallel on different layers and scales. At the same time, this is not like a romanticization or about getting lost in this complexity, but it's about being able to take a clear view of the voices with a direct focus on actors, agency, artists, institutional actors, participants, and to be able to read power relations. A quick example of this can be seen, of this duality can be seen if you go back to Arnstein's classic ladder of citizen participation, which has on the bottom manipulation and on the top 8 rungs higher an ideal of citizen control. But in the same article where she introduces this, what she admits as a simplistic abstraction, she also says that in the real world of people and programs, there might be 150 rungs with less sharp and pure distinctions among them. But she also explains why she used this simplified model. At the same time, she understands the situation as complex. She had a kind of strategic activist role with the 8-rung ladder. Part of this, skipped ahead. Part of this is getting beyond totalizing critiques, the largest leading to what Larson calls the rather stale dialectic between critique and capitalism, in which capitalism is constructed as invincible and as deflecting all criticism and critiques. Instead, global neoliberal capitalism can be seen as not totalizing because it has to be made or manifested locally. So there's always differentiation in how it has to hit the ground, so to say. Another kind of example of this dual approach is Angela McRobbie's critique. So she makes a totalizing critique of how creativity has been instrumentalized in the cultural industries, but she at the same time sees some hope in the European tradition of publicly supported social projects. So creativity understood and used towards a more progressive discourse and aims. In this view, tracing the cross-influences between artists and the public sector becomes more significant. Won't go into that now, but just to say that. In my research, I address reasons why artists and designers might engage more with public institutions. The primary one being something like Fisher's critique that the rejection of the very concept of authority has been disastrous for the left, leading to its marginalization and an unwarranted faith in spontaneity and face-to-face interaction. in getting beyond a monolithic view of institutions and power as like a single block, he wants to talk about how to responsibly use power, and his term for this is proper authority. And of course, paired with this is always a constant critical questioning and challenging.
Right, so when Älvstrandsbolaget introduced the idea of transforming Kvillebäcken, they marketed this project as a display window for sustainability. But really what we found throughout the 5 years that we were working with this book was that it became a display window for gentrification, because everyone who had a venue in Kvillebäcken had to move, and they were forcefully moved from Kvillebäcken. None of them were allowed to stay, none of them were invited back, and very few of them got any help with finding a new venue. Lives were destroyed. Thousands of people all over Gothenburg lost meeting places and lost memories and shops, and the dynamic that was so specific for Kvillebäcken. I said this was a story about who is included and who is excluded in the city. But it's also a story about who has the power and means to push their projects through and who don't have the same power. One important thing in the whole rhetorics around Kvillebäcken was to say that it was so dangerous that the city had to do something about it. It had to be transformed because it was filled with criminal biker gangs, shootings every week, sometime on a daily basis. Some politicians said to us that, but didn't you know there were snipers on the rooftops in Kvillebäcken? That was one part of the rhetorics and a discourse around Kvillebäcken as a very dangerous place, and it would be the responsible thing for the municipality to act and do something. We went through all the statistics to really go to the bottom with this, and we didn't find anything to support the idea of Kvillebäcken as particularly criminal. We certainly didn't find any criminal biker gangs, and I was looking for years. Another important part of the discourse around Kvillebäcken and why it was so urgent for the city to act was that it was empty. There was no one there. It was completely empty. It was a kind of an urban wasteland. But we went through all the protocols and we went through all their internal debate about how to go about this process. And one of the most important things was that whenever they bought a house, it was important to immediately tear it down and leave it like this, because it made it harder for those who were still in Kvillebäcken to continue their activities, and it would just create a public understanding of why it was so important to do something about an area that looked like this. So this was a constructed situation, but that was also used as part of the arguments to why it was important to do something. Alongside of the idea of Kvillebäcken as either very dangerous or very empty, they created a kind of a virtual Kvillebäcken. You could visit Kvillebäcken online. They had a blog. You could like Kvillebäcken on Facebook. You could participate in events. One event. This is an image of an event in Kvillebäcken where you could compete to win a lease on one of the new flats in the area. What the competition was about shoveling dirt. Basically, you would run, shovel some dirt, fill the bucket, and whoever filled the bucket first would win. Of course, after going through the proper checks, because you had to be a person without a criminal record, you would have to be a person who had a good income, because obviously the flats are expensive. So it was quite a narrow possibility for anyone who participated there to actually win that lease. But they could happily congratulate this guy to be a winner, and he was perfect. He's young, he's right in the target group, he has a fairly good income. He was a student, but he studied to be a sea captain. So he was the winner, and he was also part of their marketing for the following year. Kvillebäcken was an industrial area, and they wanted to give the public something else to think about and something else to connect Kvillebäcken with. Everything else that was not connected with dirty industrial jobs. So on their blog, this is just a few images that I picked from their blog. You can see cows and cakes and a beaver, and just different things that had nothing to do at all with what was actually in Kvillebäcken. Nothing about the mosques, nothing about the jobs there, nothing at all. So this is a way for someone who has a lot of power and opportunities to push a project through, to create a discourse around an area and construct an idea of why it is so important to transform Kvillebäcken.
So there was another competition for ideas for the new development. The winner suggested kind of modest things like a bike bridge, cherry trees, an art cafe, a walkway to the river. But the point is that the winning means that she was cast in bronze as a public artwork, which sits just next to the site. It's almost as if it's a direct message from the consortium who developed this area. It's everything is subject to multiple interpretations, but it's quite clarion. A contrasting approach, and I'm sure we'll see many others later, but was a more indirect approach, let's say. Was taken by the artist Walter Ruth, who's here. He accepted a public commission from the city while using the artwork as a kind of subversive statement, which I think you can tell in the
I think that you could say, what's the title of your statue? Yes. Attack on free art. Yeah. Mm. Just to say, yeah. So the latter and others are type of artworks that are more open and complex, multi-layered, and they might gesture to something beyond an individual, personalized representation, so to gesture to wider society in a more public way. One of the most damaging things about seeing gentrification as this kind of organic, natural process, which is the sum of individual actions of relatively powerless people, is that you lose a sense of proportion. I think the book, The Urban Front, as well as a couple documentaries, one of them on the right, very recent, they show how much larger coordinating forces are involved and determining. These are, of course, manifested through a set of conscious decisions, so it is tied to actors' agency in that sense. In the first case of the gentrification of Brooklyn, decisions related to rezoning by the city and developer influence. And in this documentary called Push, it's about how global finance is has been increasingly turning housing into a financial instrument. So again, the book states gentrification is neither natural nor inevitable, but made possible by political control of land use and capital flows. Originally defined, it's not defined as an organic process, but an invasion and replacement of a people and the social character of a place. It's driven by changing inequalities of distribution of power and resources.
these changes are required over time to create rent gaps, a term from economic theory, that create the urban fronts, which then can be exploited. So we propose that the city, instead of maybe ignoring the issue in their improved methods, to make sure that it stays or becomes a formally considered perspective. So in all the reports, they must show the impact on these different perspectives. So why not also a gentrification perspective? Gentrification operates as an ideology which sees it as necessary, natural, and unquestionable in urban development. That we must create an attractive image to compete for elites and ultimately to generate economic profits. And the type of attractiveness is linked to a middle class and to the so-called creative class. So the working class and associated activities are ignored and written out of planning visions. Restructuring the city in this way creates a homogenization of social experience and culture, shaping it into a more generic, familiar range of experience.
Right, so art and culture in city planning. We've talked about gentrification. We talked about gentrification of Kvillebäcken. And now I just want to move focus to a little bit to the surrounding areas of Kvillebäcken, to Ringön, Ångpannegatan, and so on. And attitude. So is it really the case that having artists moving out to Ringön or to any other place in Gothenburg, is that solving some kind of problem? Or should this be something that we address with a bit more caution? The example of Ringön, for instance, I think that all of you who knows anything about city planning in Gothenburg knows that Ringön is now to be some kind of mecca for cult and culture and art, not architecture. I'm not getting there yet. I think that Walter, for instance, can and many of you who are artists here who rent a venue or studio anywhere in the city knows that the rents are going up. A lot of you are being evicted, and if you do get offered another venue, it's most likely to be on Ringön. So who is already there on Ringön? Well, it's there's a lot of workspaces on jobs at Ringön that are dirty, noisy, who have a need for wider streets so that trucks with goods and so on can get through. It's a little dark, but nevertheless. This is a man working at Ringöverket, and I asked him, because next door to them, a bunch of artists were moving in, and I asked him, so how do you feel about these artists moving in, and how do you feel you could benefit from this? And he says, well, they're welcome to move in. I don't really know why they would want to rent anything next to us, because we're so noisy and it's dirty, and we do have needs for to keep our wide streets. We don't want to have pavements because this is not an area that you would stroll around in and so on. And then I asked an artist who just moved in to Ringön, and he said to me, when we moved out here to Ringön, people here actually started talking to each other, because apparently they hadn't done that before. And then as more artists started moving into Ringön, people started laughing and being friendly with each other, because apparently they hadn't been friendly before. And that's a kind of strange idea of the power of art and culture, and if we move out to Ringön, we will add something that is joyful and make people communicate, and it's a kind of lack of understanding of who is already there. And it's certainly not a case of interacting with those who are already there, which is something that we hear a lot, that we should interact with those who are already there. This is Truck Stop Alaska on Lindholmen. They have not been evicted, but they are the only ones left on their street. This is on Lindholmen, where Serneke wants to build a skyscraper. There are only 2 buildings left there now. One is Serneke's office, and the other one is Truck Stop Alaska. So they're hanging in there. They haven't been evicted, but they have been there for close to 10 years. They have over 20,000 members, and they've been functioning in a way where, and I think you will recognize this, many clubs in Gothenburg function like this. You sell beer to members, and it's a membership-only club. And it's been sanctioned in a kind of practical sense because the police have been there many times. The municipality was fully aware of what was going on at Truck Stop Alaska. But since there have been no problems surrounding them, the police never went out there to catch anyone drunk or behaving in a bad way. So everyone just left them alone. But when the city decided to transform this street, and when Serneke decided to build his skyscraper, Truck Stop Alaska started getting a lot of uncomfortable visits all of a sudden. They had a raid, the police went there, took their beer, all kinds of authorities showed up and fined them for too loud noise and so on. And slowly but surely just sank Truck Stop Alaska, because they don't have any money. So this is also a way of getting people to move. I'm just going to show you some images. It's a bit dark, but this is a feminist black metal festival at Truck Stop Alaska. Bob Logg, American artist. Here's the audience. And I want to say, I went to a meeting with Truck Stop Alaska and a representative of Serneke, and they were saying, well, where do you want us to go? We have been here for longer than you have. We have our venue here. We want to stay here. Where do you suggest that artists and people working in culture, where do you suggest that we go? And he said, well, you should move further out, because it's when it really comes down to it, it's a question of money. If you don't have the money, you have to move further out. And if you have the money, you can stay here. But also, we will have a big reception in our tower. And in that reception, you artists can come and spend time. So I want to finish with this image. You remember I said that I was looking for criminal biker gangs in Kvillebäcken, and I couldn't find any. But 2015, when our book was published, this gang moved in, this society, motorcycle society, moved in to Ångpannegatan. They are not criminals. They are called, this is the president of No Time, MC. And the woman sitting there is president of Athena, MC. And I saw them a few days ago. And they wanted me to give you a message. They said that we are tired of being used as an excuse and an alibi when the city want to transform an area and chase people out. We are fed up with not being included, with being considered as criminals or thugs, and we would very much like to be involved in what's going on at Ångpannegatan, for instance, or in the surrounding area. They are fed up with being denied access to venues and so on. So I would like to send an invitation to Kulturförvaltningen, Lundby, that you are welcome to come there and have a cup of coffee and a bun, and I will go with you if you want, and talk about what's going on Ångpannegatan. And with that image, this is our last, and I think we are right on time. This is our last image, so yeah, thank you.